She had built a $1 billion empire from nothing, survived a crash that should have killed her, and watched 13 trained bodyguards walk out her door one by one, each of them too afraid to stay. Now someone inside her own company was finishing what the accident had started, and the only man standing between Sophia Bennett and a perfectly planned murder was a quiet ex-soldier who asked no questions, made no promises, and showed up anyway. What he uncovered in the weeks that followed would expose a betrayal so calculated, so cold, it would shake an entire corporation to its foundation, and force two broken people to choose between survival and trust. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now settle in, this one's going to keep you up. The morning Ethan Walker walked into Bennett Technologies for his interview, the receptionist looked at him the way people look at someone who doesn't know they're about to make a terrible mistake. She was young, maybe 23, with the kind of forced cheerfulness that comes from being told to smile regardless of what's happening. She smiled at him now, but her eyes did something different. They dipped briefly toward a framed photo on the edge of her desk before snapping back to her computer screen. Ethan noticed. He noticed everything. It was both a gift and the thing that made it hardest to sleep. "Ethan Walker," he said. "I have a 9 o'clock. "Of course." She typed something. "With HR." "With Ms. Bennett directly." The smile faltered just slightly. Let me just confirm that." He stood with his hands loose at his sides while she made the call, and he used the 30 seconds to read the lobby the way his instructors had taught him years ago, and the Navy had refined into something close to instinct. 2 cameras above the entrance, angles slightly off from optimal. Someone had adjusted them, or they'd never been set correctly to begin with. A security guard at the side desk who was watching his phone instead of the room. Elevator bank to the left, stairwell door to the right, propped open with a rubber wedge that absolutely should not have been there. The receptionist hung up and gave him a real smile this time, surprised. "She's expecting you, 42nd floor. Someone will meet you at the elevator." The someone turned out to be a woman in her 50s named Claire Morgan, who introduced herself as Ms. Bennett's executive assistant with the brisk efficiency of a person who had learned long ago that small talk was a luxury she couldn't afford. She shook his hand once, firm, assessed him in about 2 seconds flat, and started walking. 13 bodyguards, she said, not looking at him. "In 6 months." "I heard." "The last one quit by text, didn't even come back for his things." "People get scared," Ethan said. Claire glanced at him sideways. "Are you scared?" "Not yet." She made a sound that might have been approval and might have been something else entirely, and said nothing more until they reached the corner office at the end of a long hall of glass walls and open workspaces. She knocked twice, opened the door, and stepped aside. Sophia Bennett was on the phone. She held up one finger without looking at him. "Wait." And Ethan waited, using the time to take in the room. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls, northern and eastern exposure, a view of the city that on a clear day probably went on forever. Today was overcast and the skyline sat gray and close. Her desk was a slab of dark walnut, clean except for 2 monitors, a legal pad covered in handwriting, and a coffee cup that had gone cold hours ago based on the ring it had left on the notepad. She was 30 years old, but she looked like someone who hadn't slept well in months. Not in a way that made her seem fragile, but in the way of someone who has been running on determination for so long that the exhaustion has simply become part of the architecture. Her dark hair was pulled back. She wore a gray blazer over a white shirt, and the wheelchair she sat in was matte black and clearly custom, the kind that costs more than most people's cars and folds down to almost nothing. She hung up without saying goodbye to whoever was on the line. "Ethan Walker." She looked at him directly, the way people do when they've decided in advance not to be impressed by anything. "Sit down." He sat. "You read the file," she said. It wasn't a question. "Enough of it." "Then you know about the others." 13 bodyguards in 6 months. The last one quit by text. Something moved across her face. Not quite amusement, not quite irritation. "Claire already briefed you." In the elevator. She likes to establish context. Sophia picked up a pen, rolled it between her fingers, set it down. I'm going to be direct with you, Mr. Walker. I don't have the patience for people who dance around things anymore. I used to, but I lost it somewhere around bodyguard number 7. Direct is fine. The security company sent me your file. Former Navy SEAL, 8 years active, 2 overseas deployments, honorable discharge. No disciplinary record. 1 commendation for... She glanced at the folder on her desk. Actions taken under fire that saved 3 members of your unit. Single father, daughter, age 6. She looked up. Her name is Maya. It is. The previous guards, most of them left because they believed the assignment was genuinely dangerous. That the accidents happening around me weren't accidents. She paused. They were right. Ethan said nothing. You're not going to ask me what I mean by that? I figure you're about to tell me. She studied him for a moment. Then she said, 6 months ago, I was in a car accident on the Riverside Expressway. My vehicle lost control on a dry road at moderate speed with no traffic in front of me. The official determination was mechanical failure. I spent 11 days in intensive care, and I have not walked since. She said it the way you say something you've had to say so many times that the words have become disconnected from the weight they carry. 4 weeks after I came back to work, a floor lamp in my office fell and hit my chair. 3 weeks after that, a document shredder in the copy room adjacent to my office caught fire at 2 in the morning. Then the lobby coffee cart, the one I pass every morning, was found to have a gas leak. The facilities manager who discovered it disappeared before he could be interviewed. Disappeared how? Resigned, left the city. His forwarding address turned out to be a mailbox at a UPS store in Phoenix that was registered to someone who doesn't exist. Ethan leaned forward slightly. Who knows the details of your daily schedule? My assistant, my executive team, building security, my driver. She paused. And apparently whoever has been paying someone inside this building to report my movements. You think it's internal. I don't think, I know. Her jaw tightened. I just can't prove it yet. The room was quiet for a moment. From somewhere outside the window, a helicopter moved across the gray sky and vanished. Why me? Ethan asked. Specifically. Because you're the only applicant who didn't immediately start asking about threat assessment protocols and armored vehicle specifications. She picked up the pen again. You asked to see the incident reports instead. He had. All 14 of them, going back to the first week after she'd returned from the hospital. He'd read them in the car on the way over. They read like someone who's very careful, he said. Careful how? Each incident has a clean explanation. Mechanical failure, electrical fault, human error. Nothing that looks designed. But the pattern is, he stopped, chose the word carefully, deliberate. Whoever this is, they're not rushing. Sophia set the pen down and looked at him with something that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite fear, and was perhaps the particular expression of someone who has been trying to explain something for months, and has finally found a person who is already 2 steps ahead of them. When can you start? She said. I started when I walked through the lobby and saw your stairwell door propped open with a rubber wedge. He spent the first week not guarding her so much as learning the building. He walked every corridor on every floor, at different hours, noting which emergency exits were habitually propped or blocked, which camera angles were compromised, which employees were where they weren't supposed to be, and why. He sat in the company cafeteria at lunch and ate quietly and listened to conversations he wasn't part of. He introduced himself to building maintenance as someone from corporate reviewing safety compliance, which was technically not a lie, and spent an afternoon going through the maintenance logs going back 18 months. He said very little to Sophia during that first week. In the mornings, he was at the building before her car arrived. At night, he waited until she was home, and the door was locked before he left. In between, he was mostly a presence at the edge of her peripheral vision, someone who appeared when she moved from one place to another and blended back into the background when she settled. On Thursday of the first week, she called him into her office at 8 in the evening, when most of the floor had emptied out. You make my people nervous, she said. Good. That's not... She stopped. Tried again. It's disruptive. I'm not here to be comfortable to be around. She looked at him with something between frustration and reluctant agreement. What have you found? Too early to be certain. That's not an answer. Your head of building security, Marcus Webb, he's been with the company 4 years. He submitted a request to upgrade the executive floor camera system 8 months ago. The request was approved. The upgrade was never implemented, but the budget line was marked complete. Sophia went very still. The cameras on this floor have the same coverage gaps they've had since the building was fitted, Ethan continued, which means whoever has access to the executive floor also knows exactly where they can move without being recorded. You're saying Marcus is involved. I'm saying Marcus either let it happen or was told to let it happen. There's a difference. The difference being whether he's the problem or someone is using him. Right. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the city had turned its evening lights on, and the window had gone from gray to the dark orange of reflected streetlight. Why did you take this job? She said suddenly. He looked at her. I know what the file says, she continued. I know your background. I know you left the Navy and started private security work because it fit around your daughter's school schedule and because you're good at it. She paused. But 13 people before you looked at this situation and decided it wasn't worth the risk. You're not reckless. Your record doesn't suggest you're someone who does things for the money or the thrill. So why did you take it? Ethan was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't used to being asked directly. Because you're still here, he said. After 6 months of this, you still came back to work, still running the company. Most people would have stepped back, given the board a reason to take over, made it easier on themselves. He looked at her steadily. You didn't. That tells me something. It tells you I'm stubborn. It tells me you're fighting for something real, and people fighting for something real deserve to have someone fighting next to them. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked away, out at the city lights, and said quietly, My CFO told me last week that perhaps it was time to consider handing off some operational responsibilities. For my own peace of mind, her voice was perfectly level. What he meant was that a CEO in a wheelchair who keeps having accidents is a liability. What did you tell him? The corner of her mouth moved. I told him his performance review was in 3 weeks and suggested he spend the time before then reconsidering his vocabulary. Ethan almost smiled. I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Walker, she said, from this chair or from this company. I know, he said. That's why I'm staying. But he had not told her, because there was no reason to tell her yet, that the maintenance log had contained something else. Buried in a routine service record from 7 months ago, 1 month before her car crash, was a work order for the company fleet vehicles. Routine inspection, it said. All vehicles signed off as cleared. The work order had been submitted by a technician whose employee ID number corresponded to a person who had left the company 14 months earlier. Someone had accessed the system using a dead employee's credentials, submitted a fake work order, and signed off on vehicles that may or may not have ever been inspected. The timeline matched exactly. Ethan sat in his car in the parking garage that night and thought about patterns, about the difference between someone who wanted to scare Sophia Bennett and someone who wanted her dead, about how carefully this had been constructed, and how long it had been going on, and what that said about the level of access and patience involved. His phone buzzed, a text from his sister who was watching Maya. She wants to know if you're coming home for dinner tomorrow. He typed back, Tell her yes, definitely yes. Then he sat for another few minutes looking at the maintenance log on his laptop screen and at the name of the executive who had originally approved the fleet service contract. Damian Cross, Senior Vice President of Operations. Ethan saved the file, closed the laptop, and drove home to his daughter. Bogota. Maya was 6 years old, and she had her mother's eyes and her father's habit of watching doorways when she entered a room, which was a thing she'd developed on her own and that Ethan noticed every time and said nothing about, because he didn't know what to say about it. She was awake when he got home, technically past her bedtime, sitting at the kitchen table with a worksheet from school and a cup of hot chocolate that his sister Janet had made her and that she'd been using as a prop to stay up rather than actually drinking. You're late, Maya said, without looking up from the worksheet. I know. Sorry, Bug. Janet made pasta. I'll heat some up. She already did. It's in the microwave. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at his daughter for a moment. The way she sat with her back straight and her pencil gripped too hard, concentrating on something she found genuinely difficult, refusing to give up on it. 6 years old and already stubborn in the best possible way. He thought, not for the first time, that she deserved a father who came home at a reasonable hour. He thought, also not for the first time, that she deserved a father who hadn't spent 3 years overseas and come back to find the world had rearranged itself without asking anyone's permission. He heated the pasta. He sat across from Maya while she finished the worksheet. When she finally pushed it aside and looked up at him, she said, "Is your new job scary?" He considered the question seriously, the way she expected him to, because she was 6 and she'd already figured out that adults who give children fake reassurance are wasting everyone's time. "Parts of it," he said, "but you're going to be okay." "I'm going to do my job right. That's the best answer I've got." She seemed to accept this. She finished the hot chocolate, which was cold by then, and announced she was going to bed, and she hugged him once, tight, the way she did, pressing her whole face against his shirt for exactly 3 seconds before letting go and walking away like it hadn't happened. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a while after she was gone, the maintenance log turning over in the back of his mind. Someone had planted a fake work order, someone with access to employee records going back 14 months, someone patient enough to set up a murder and careful enough to make each step look like an accident. And Sophia Bennett had no idea how deep it went. He was going to find out. He was going to follow every thread until it led somewhere that couldn't be explained away. And then he was going to deal with whatever he found. That was the job. That was always the job. Not the standing in lobbies and the riding in elevators and the careful positioning between a client and a crowd. The real job was what happened underneath all of that. The reading and the pattern recognition and the willingness to sit with an uncomfortable truth until it resolved into something you could actually act on. He cleaned up the kitchen, checked the locks on the front and back doors, and went to bed. In the morning, he was at Bennett Technologies before Sophia's car arrived. The stairwell door was propped open again. This time, someone had left a small piece of electrical tape over the latch mechanism so that it would look closed to a passing glance while remaining functionally unsecured. Ethan photographed it, removed the tape, and pocketed it without saying anything to the lobby guard. Then he went upstairs and waited because whatever was coming, it was getting more specific, and specific meant it was getting close. The piece of electrical tape sat in a small evidence bag on Ethan's desk. If you could call the corner of the building security office, he'd claimed for himself a desk, which was generous. It was a folding table pushed against a wall with no windows, surrounded by filing cabinets that hadn't been opened in years based on the dust on their handles. He'd put up a cork board and covered it with printed photos, incident reports, employee records, and lengths of red string that his daughter would have found either fascinating or deeply concerning. He looked at the tape every morning when he came in. A small thing, the kind of detail that could be dismissed as a maintenance oversight, a door that kept swinging open and someone's lazy solution to a minor annoyance. If Ethan hadn't been looking for it, he would have walked past it the same way everyone else in that building had walked past it every single day for however long it had been there. But someone had put it there. Someone who knew which stairwell connected the parking sublevel to the lobby without passing any camera. Someone who needed that door available on short notice without having to swipe a card or explain themselves to a security log. He'd pulled the card access records for the stairwell, no entries or exits through that door in the past 30 days. Which meant either nobody was using it or somebody had figured out how to use it without their credentials registering. Both possibilities were bad. One was worse. On the second Friday of his assignment, Ethan arrived at 7:15 and found Claire Morgan already at her desk, which was not unusual. Claire seemed to operate on a schedule that started sometime before the building opened and ended well after it closed. What was unusual was that she looked up when he passed and said, "Sophia's wheelchair. Check it before she uses it this morning." He stopped. Why? Because the overnight cleaning crew were on the 42nd floor until 11:30 last night, and when I came in this morning, the chair was parked 6 inches from where she left it. You measured? I didn't have to. She parks it in exactly the same spot every time, against the left side of her desk, angled at 45 degrees so she can transfer into it without assistance. Claire's voice was very flat and very controlled. It wasn't at 45 degrees. Ethan went into the office. He spent 20 minutes going over the wheelchair with methodical attention. The frame, the wheels, the brake mechanism, the footrests, the jointed armrests. He wasn't a mechanical engineer, but he'd been trained in vehicle and equipment inspection during his SEAL years, and he knew what he was looking for. Anything that had been loosened, modified, cut partway through, or otherwise interfered with in a way that would hold under normal use but fail under stress. He found it in the left brake cable, a small nick in the outer sheath, deep enough to weaken the interior wire, but not visible without looking directly at it at the right angle. Brakes would work fine until a certain amount of pressure was applied, coming down a ramp, for instance, or stopping sharply, at which point the cable would snap and the chair would keep moving. Sophia arrived at 8:15. Ethan was standing in the doorway of her office. "Your chair needs to go to the repair shop," he said. "I have a loaner coming up from building services." She looked at him. "What happened to it?" "Brake cable's compromised." Her expression didn't change much, but something in her eyes went through a complicated shift. Through fear, through anger, out the other side into a kind of cold steadiness that he was starting to recognize as her default response to being afraid. "The cleaning crew," she said. "Somebody in or near the cleaning crew. Could be someone hired for the shift, could be someone using a cleaning crew uniform to access the floor without raising flags. Can you find out which?" "Already requested the vendor logs. The cleaning company subcontracts, which means the roster for any given shift is a spreadsheet with a lot of names on it, half of which won't have proper documentation." He paused. "But that's useful information too. Someone chose this method for a reason. It's deniable. If the cable snaps and you're hurt, there's a maintenance paper trail that'll take months to untangle." Sophia transferred into the loaner chair, a standard model that she moved through with the practiced efficiency of someone who has learned to work with what's available, and looked at the wheelchair from the other side of the desk. 13 guards, she said. None of them found anything like this. The previous guards were hired to be visible deterrents, stand near you, look intimidating, respond to direct threats. He leaned against the doorframe. That's a reasonable approach if someone is worried about a mugging or an aggressive ex. It's completely wrong for what's actually happening here, which is someone who knows your building, your schedule, your habits, and your security setup. Someone with time and resources and a very high tolerance for patience. He watched her process this. They're not trying to scare you into leaving. They've been trying to kill you from the beginning, and they've been okay with taking as long as it needs. The room was very quiet for a moment. "You really know how to start a Monday," Sophia said. "It's Friday." "Walker, every day feels like Monday right now." He almost smiled. She almost did too, and then didn't, and looked away. "Tell me what you need from me," she said. "Information, access, whatever it is. I need you to start treating every change in your routine as a potential setup. Someone moved your chair. That means they had access. But it also means they knew your routine well enough to know exactly what moving the chair would accomplish." He straightened. "Who knows that you park your chair at 45 degrees? She opened her mouth, closed it. "Claire, my physical therapist. Damien Cross attended one of my first days back. He was in the office when I transferred, so he would have seen it." She paused. "Probably half the executive floor has seen it at some point. I want a list of everyone who's been alone in your office after hours in the past 6 months. That'll take some time to compile. Start with Damien Cross." She looked at him. Something careful moved through her expression. "Damien has been with this company for 9 years. He was one of the people who helped me take it from a Series A to where it is now. I know his history. I've read his file." "Then you know he has no motive." "I know he has no obvious motive," Ethan said. "That's different." She held his gaze for a long moment, and he could see her wrestling with it. The loyalty of 9 years against the logic of what he was telling her. It wasn't a simple thing, and he didn't pretend it was. "I'll get you the list," she said finally. "We'll just see." The incidents escalated in the 3rd week, and they stopped looking like accidents. The elevator was the one that scared him the most. Not because it was the most dangerous, but because of how precisely it was executed. Sophia's daily route from the 42nd floor to the parking level took her through the main elevator bank, always at the same time, so it's between 5:40 and 6 each evening, when the floor had mostly cleared out. On a Tuesday evening, Ethan held the elevator for her as usual, rode down 2 floors to 40, and then the doors opened and didn't close again. He pressed the close button, nothing. Pressed lobby, nothing. The panel was live, all the floor indicators lit, the buttons illuminated, but the car sat there, doors open, not moving. He looked at the emergency phone panel in the corner, lifted the handset. Dead. Someone cut the communication line, he said. Sophia was looking at the ceiling of the car. The ventilation stopped. He hadn't noticed that. He noticed it now. The faint mechanical hum that elevators produce, which was so constant that your brain filtered it out, was gone. The air in the car was already slightly stale. How long before it becomes a problem? Sophia asked. Her voice was steady, but her knuckles on the armrest were not. Few hours at least. We're not in danger. He was already examining the ceiling panel. But that's not the point. The point being that someone wanted me stuck here, alone, with no way to call for help. Wanted you panicking. Wanted the incident on record as another malfunction, another close call, another piece of evidence that this building can't keep you safe. He found the emergency hatch release and looked at the drop above. I'm going to manually re-engage the drive brake and get us moving. It's going to take about 10 minutes. You know how to do that? I know a lot of things that are useful in confined spaces. It took 12 minutes. When the car finally moved and the doors opened on the lobby level, the head of building security was standing there with 2 of his staff, looking appropriately alarmed. Marcus Webb was 51 years old, heavy-set, with the air of someone who had spent a career in institutional security and had made peace with the administrative parts of the job. He looked genuinely shaken when the elevator opened. Ms. Bennett, I'm so sorry. The system flagged an error, but by the time How long was the malfunction? Sophia asked. We're still investigating, but it appears there was an override entered into the elevator control system at approximately... Who has access to the elevator control system, Marcus? Webb hesitated. Building maintenance. My team. Corporate IT has a back-end access for diagnostics. Ethan watched Webb's face while he answered. He'd been watching Webb's face for 2.5 weeks. I want the access log for tonight going back 12 hours, Ethan said. I'll have my team pull... Now. Not tomorrow. Now. Webb looked at him with the expression of a man who wanted to object and had decided it wasn't worth it. I'll have it to you within the hour. He didn't have it within the hour. He had it at 11 the next morning, and when Ethan went through it, 3 entries from the previous evening had been deleted. Not cleanly. There were timestamp gaps that showed something had been removed, but the actual data was gone. He photographed the log and added it to the corkboard. The ceiling fixture happened on a Thursday. Sophia had a meeting in conference room B at 2 o'clock, which was her habit on Thursdays. Weekly operations review with her senior team, same room, same time, for the past 14 months. The meeting ran 90 minutes. At 3:25, she rolled out of the conference room and down the hall past the decorative light fixture that hung from the ceiling in the corridor outside the executive lounge. Ethan had been standing at the end of that corridor, and he saw it. He saw it the way he had sometimes seen things in other places, at other times. Not thought about them, but seen them with a part of his brain that was already moving before his conscious mind caught up. The fixture was a large industrial-style pendant, probably 40 pounds, suspended from a ceiling bracket by a threaded rod. The rod was shaking. Not much. Just slightly. The kind of movement that would look like a vibration from an HVAC system to anyone not paying attention. He was across the corridor in 4 steps, and he grabbed the back of Sophia's chair and moved it forward hard, and the fixture came down 2 seconds later with a sound like a car collision and hit the floor exactly where she had been. The corridor went silent. Sophia was breathing hard. She looked back at the fixture on the floor. The bracket had been nearly sheared through, the threaded rod cut to about 15% of its original thickness. And then she looked at Ethan, who was standing between her and the debris with his chest heaving and something dangerous in his eyes. "How did you see it?" she said. "I was watching the ceiling." Nobody watches the ceiling. I watch everything. She stared at him, stared at Old. Her hands were shaking on the armrests, which she noticed, which seemed to make her angry, and she gripped the armrest tighter. This is the fourth time, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Brake cable, elevator, and now… She stopped. This isn't random. This isn't someone hoping for an opportunity. These are planned, Walker. These are planned. I know. Then why… She stopped again, and he could see her pulling herself back from something. I need you to tell me honestly. How close are they to succeeding? He crouched down to be at her eye level, which he didn't usually do, and she seemed to notice it. They haven't succeeded in 6 months, he said. The crash didn't finish it. Every attempt since then hasn't finished it. That means either they're incompetent, which they're clearly not, or something keeps getting in the way. You, me, and you. You change your routine more than you realize. You're unpredictable in small ways. You came out of that meeting 8 minutes early today. She was quiet for a moment. The fixture was rigged for 3:25, or close to it. Based on the rate of metal fatigue, it was close to its limit. Another minute or two and it would have come down on whoever was underneath it. He looked at her directly. You came out early. That matters. That's a very thin margin. It is, he said, which is why we're going to stop waiting for the next one. He went through the financial records legally at first, whatever was publicly available, whatever Claire quietly provided without being asked, the procurement logs that any senior security contractor could request access to. He was looking for Damien Cross specifically, but he was also looking at the shape of the company's finances over the past 18 months, because money was almost always the architecture under everything else. Bennett Technologies had gone through an aggressive expansion phase beginning approximately 20 months ago. New offices, new acquisitions, new hiring. The kind of growth that looked spectacular from the outside and created enormous internal strain. Several executive-level hires, a significant infrastructure contract, and a Series D funding round that had brought in a new lead investor. Harold Prescott. Ethan pulled everything he could find on Prescott. 63 years old, private equity background, known in investor circles for taking significant positions in mid-stage tech companies and then leveraging his board presence to influence strategy. 2 previous companies where Prescott had been a major investor had undergone leadership changes within 18 months of his investment. In both cases, the founding CEO had departed under pressure, and in both cases, a more management-friendly leadership team had taken over and refocused the company on faster returns. In both cases, the company's original direction, the thing that had made it worth investing in, had been gradually dismantled. Ethan sat with this for a long time. Then he found the connection he'd been looking for without knowing he was looking for it. A shell company called Veriton Capital Partners, registered in Delaware, which had been a participant in a secondary financing round for Bennett Technologies. Not publicly disclosed, structured as a convertible note that would convert to equity under specific conditions, one of which was a change in executive leadership. Veriton Capital Partners shared a registered agent with 2 other entities. One of them was a company that held the deed to a vacation property in coastal South Carolina. The property was registered to Damien Cross. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Then he picked up the evidence bag with the piece of electrical tape in it, turned it over in his hands, and set it back down. He thought about the fake work order in the fleet maintenance log, about the 11 days Sophia had spent in intensive care, about the 11 days she didn't know she had spent while someone in her own building was watching the news to see if she survived. He thought about the cleaning crew uniform, about the elevator log with 3 entries deleted, about a ceiling fixture over a corridor that Sophia walked through every Thursday at 3:25. None of this was improvised. None of it had been put together in a week or a month. This was a plan that had been running for close to 2 years, patient and careful and willing to absorb setbacks, willing to try again and again until the job was done. He needed more. What he had was suggestive but not conclusive, and he knew from experience that suggestive evidence against someone with money and lawyers was not the same as evidence. But he also knew something else now. They were getting more aggressive. The gap between attempts was shortening. The first months had been single incidents weeks apart. Now, they were happening almost weekly. which meant one of two things. Either the timeline had moved up for reasons he didn't know yet, or someone was starting to feel that the window was closing, that Ethan's presence was making the operation harder to execute, and they needed to finish before he found too much. He filed that thought away and went to find Claire Morgan. He found her at her desk at 6:40 in the evening, which was not unusual, eating a takeout container of soup and reading something on her monitor that she angled slightly when he approached. "Veriton Capital Partners," he said. "You've heard the name." She looked at him over the soup container for a moment. "I've seen it in financing documents. Small position, convertible note." "You know about the conversion condition?" "I know what I've read." She set the soup down. "Leadership change triggers conversion to equity at a favorable rate, standard enough structure in certain kinds of deals. Standard enough to not raise flags. Standard enough that nobody looked too hard at it, yes." "Who negotiated that deal on the company side?" Claire was quiet for a moment. Damian Cross led that financing round. "Did Sophia know the details of the conversion conditions?" "She signed the documentation, but the round was complex, a lot of moving parts, and Damian was managing the investor relations." She paused. "She trusted him." "I know she did." Claire looked at him steadily. She had the quality of someone who had been watching things unfold for a long time from a position of necessary silence, and the weight of that showed in the careful way she chose what to say and what not to. "I have some documents," she said, "things I've been holding on to for the past 4 months, because I didn't know who to give them to, and I didn't know who could be trusted." She held his gaze. "I'm telling you this because you pulled that chair apart looking for what I knew was wrong with it, and you got her out from under that light fixture, and every other guard they sent her walked away." "What kind of documents?" "Email threads, internal communications, nothing that proves anything on its own, but—" She stopped. "Context. A lot of context that starts to mean something when you lay it next to other things." "Can you get them to me?" "Not tonight, and not in this building." She looked at her monitor briefly. "There are cameras I don't trust anymore." "Tomorrow morning. Coffee place on Archer Street, 2 blocks east." She nodded. 7 o'clock. He left her there with her soup and took the elevator down to the parking level. He walked the perimeter of his car before getting in, checked underneath, checked the wheel wells. Old habit. He'd been doing it for 20 years, and he suspected he'd be doing it until he was too old to crouch down that far. He sat in the car and called his sister. "How's Maya?" "Asleep," Janet said. "She made me read the same book 4 times, the one about the dog." "The dog that builds a house?" "Why does the dog need a house, Ethan? He's a dog. He could just live outside." He almost laughed. Almost. "Tell her I'll be home for breakfast." "She'll hold you to that." "I know. That's fine." He hung up and sat in the parking garage for a while, thinking about a shell company in Delaware and a vacation property in South Carolina, and the look on Sophia's face when she'd turned around and seen the light fixture on the floor where she'd been a moment before. She'd been afraid. Of course she'd been afraid. Anyone who says they wouldn't be afraid is lying. But underneath the fear, there had been something else. Something that had crystallized in the past 2.5 weeks into something he hadn't expected. She was angry. Genuinely, specifically angry in the way of someone who has finally stopped being shocked that the danger is real and has started to focus entirely on what to do about it. That was the thing about Sophia Bennett that had made him take the job and made him stay. She wasn't waiting to be saved. She was waiting for someone to fight alongside her, and there was an enormous difference between those two things. He started the car and drove home through the late-night city, past streetlights and closed storefronts, and the occasional other driver going wherever people go at that hour. And he thought about everything he still didn't know and everything he still needed to find. And by the time he reached his street, he had the outline of a plan. It wasn't a good plan yet. It was the beginning of one. But the beginning was enough for tonight. Claire was already at the coffee place on Archer Street when Ethan arrived at 6:52, sitting at a corner table with her back to the wall and a cup of black coffee in front of her that she hadn't touched. She had a manila envelope on the table that she moved to her lap when he sat down. "You're early," he said. "I didn't sleep." She looked like it. The composed efficiency that characterized her in the office was still there, but underneath it, something had worn thin. I've been thinking about whether I'm doing the right thing. And? And I decided that doing nothing is also a choice. And I've been making that choice for 4 months. And a ceiling fixture almost landed on her yesterday. She put the envelope on the table. So, he didn't touch it yet. He ordered coffee from the server who appeared, waited until she left, and then looked at Claire. Tell me what's in it first. Claire wrapped both hands around her cup. 6 weeks after Sophia came back from the hospital, Damien Cross had a private meeting with Harold Prescott. Not unusual. Damien manages investor relations. Prescott is a significant investor. But the meeting wasn't logged. I know about it because I arranged the car service, and then Damien asked me to delete the booking. Did you? I moved it to a personal folder instead. She paused. I told myself I was being overly cautious, that there was probably a legitimate explanation. She looked at the envelope. There are 3 more unlogged meetings over the following 2 months, and there are internal emails between Damien and a man named Greg Tully, who officially works in our IT infrastructure department, discussing what they call the transition timeline. Transition to what? That's not specified. But the emails discuss Sophia's continued operational involvement as a problem, and they reference milestones. The first milestone was her accident. She said the word carefully, giving it the weight it deserved. They call it the first milestone. Ethan was quiet for a moment. How did you get these emails? I have administrative access to executive communications as part of my role. I'm supposed to use it for scheduling and records management. She held his gaze. I used it differently. Does anyone know you have this? No. He opened the envelope. 14 pages printed on plain paper. No letterhead, no identifying metadata on the printouts. She'd been careful. He read through them with the focused speed of someone trained to extract relevant information quickly, and by the time he got to the last page, his coffee had gone from hot to warm, and Claire had drunk half of hers. The emails were careful. Nothing that said kill her or arrange an accident. But they were the written record of 2 people coordinating around a shared objective that they consistently referred to in euphemism: the transition, the resolution, the change in operational structure. And the timeline they discussed mapped almost exactly to the sequence of incidents Ethan had been documenting for 3 weeks. He looked up. Greg Tully has access to the elevator control system. He has access to most of the building's digital infrastructure. He's been in that role for 2 years. Did Damien hire him? Claire's expression answered the question before she spoke. Damien recommended him. Sophia approved the hire, but she was working from Damien's recommendation. He put the pages back in the envelope. I need you to keep doing what you've been doing. If there are more communications, more meetings, anything that changes in the pattern, I need to know. And then what? You take this to the police? Not yet. This is circumstantial. A good defense attorney dissolves this in 20 minutes. He tucked the envelope inside his jacket. I need something that connects the financial structure directly to the operational planning. The Veriton Shell Company, the conversion conditions, the meetings. Right now, those are 3 separate threads. I need them to be one thread. How long will that take? I don't know. He was honest about it. But the attempts are accelerating, which means they're either running out of patience or they know I'm getting close. Claire looked at him across the small table. Outside the window, the morning was starting in the usual way. Delivery trucks, early commuters, the city assembling itself for another day. She doesn't know how serious it is, does she? Claire said. Not really. She knows someone is trying to kill her. That's not what I mean. I mean, she doesn't know how long this has been planned. She thinks it started with the accident. Claire's voice was very controlled. The emails go back 22 months, Walker. This started before the Series D, before Prescott came in. They approached Prescott. Damien found him and brought him in specifically for this. Ethan sat with that for a moment. 22 months. Before the funding round. Before the accident. Before any of the things that Sophia believed were the beginning. Damien Cross had been building this while helping her build the company. Sitting across from her in strategy meetings and investor presentations, and the 1,000 ordinary moments of running a corporation together, and underneath all of it, for nearly 2 years, he had been engineering her removal in the most permanent way available. "She needs to know," Claire said. "She will. When I have enough to protect her when she knows." He stood. "Until then, nothing changes on your end. You haven't seen me outside this building. You haven't given me anything." She nodded once. He left first, walking east into the morning. He told Sophia that afternoon, sitting in her office with the door closed and the blinds turned so that nobody in the open workspace outside could read lips. He didn't soften it. He had considered whether to, and decided she'd earned the unedited version. He told her about the emails and the unlogged meetings. He told her about Veriton Capital Partners and the vacation property in South Carolina. He told her that Damian Cross had brought Harold Prescott into her company with the specific intention of engineering a change in leadership, and that the car crash on the Riverside Expressway 18 months ago had been milestone 1 in a plan that had been running for 22 months. Sophia listened without interrupting. She sat very still, which he'd come to understand was what she did when something hit hard enough to require full containment. Her hands were flat on the desk. Her face was composed in a way that was clearly costing her something. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. 22 months, she said. Yes. He was in my hospital room. Her voice was absolutely level. When I woke up, he was one of the first people there. He held my hand and told me the company was going to be fine, that I should focus on recovery, that he would handle everything. Ethan said nothing. He cried. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I thought he cried because he was relieved I was alive. Sophia. Don't. She held up one hand briefly. I just need a minute. He gave her the minute. He looked at the window, at the city framed in glass, at the gray sky that had been threatening rain for 2 days and hadn't managed to follow through. When she spoke again, her voice was different, still controlled, but with something harder underneath it, something that had been soft and was now not. What do we do? We keep building the case. The emails and the shell company structure are strong, but not enough on their own. I need to connect Damian and Prescott directly to the operational side, the sabotage, the hired contractors, the people who actually executed the attempts. Greg Tully. Tully's a piece of it, but someone hired the original saboteur who worked on your car. Someone has been paying for the access, the equipment, the people who have been moving through this building. That money has to come from somewhere and go somewhere. He paused. I've got a former colleague who does financial forensics. I want to bring him in on the Veriton structure. Do it. It'll take a few days. I understand. She looked at him directly. In the meantime, I want to keep this between you, me, and Claire. Nobody on the executive team. Nobody in the building. Agreed. Which means Damian Cross keeps his access and his position for now, and we act like nothing has changed. She absorbed this. You want me to sit across from him in the operations review on Thursday. I want you to sit across from him and give him no reason to suspect we know what we know. Can you do that? The look she gave him had several layers in it. I ran a company while someone was trying to kill me for 6 months. I can sit through a meeting. He believed her. The question was whether she believed herself, and he could see from the set of her jaw that she was deciding yes. The sniper hit on a Wednesday morning. Ethan had been in the office since 7, which was 2 hours before Sophia arrived, and he had spent that time reviewing the security camera footage from the previous 3 days with the particular attention of someone looking not for what was there, but for what should have been there and wasn't. He'd found 2 more blind spots that hadn't existed a month ago. Camera angles subtly adjusted, not removed, just shifted enough to leave a narrow corridor of unmonitored space near the north stairwell on 42. He was in the middle of documenting this when he heard Sophia's elevator arrive, and he stepped into the hallway to meet her the way he always did, and the first shot came through the window approximately 4 seconds later. He heard it before he fully processed it. A crack that was wrong, that didn't belong to the building's ordinary sounds, and the way the glass behaved told him everything. Not breaking, but starring from a point of impact, the specific pattern of a high-velocity round hitting tempered glass. The bullet had passed through and embedded in the partition wall behind Sophia's desk. He was already moving. 3 steps closed the distance, and he put himself over her chair between her and the windows, using his body as the shield because there was nothing else available and no time to get her behind something solid. He drove the chair hard left toward the interior wall, away from the window line, and the second shot came while they were moving. He felt it pass, the pressure displacement of something traveling very fast in close proximity, and it hit the monitor on her desk, and the monitor exploded in a shower of plastic and glass. "Down! Stay down! I'm down!" He had one hand on the back of the chair and was using the desk as partial cover, scanning the window. The building across the street. The angle was wrong for street level, too high. The shots were coming from elevation. "Call 911. He passed her his phone without looking at her. "Tell them shots fired from an elevated position, 42nd floor of this building. Shooter is across the street, north-facing windows." She took the phone. He heard her voice start, steady, clear, functional, and he kept his eyes on the window. A third shot. It took out the glass entirely this time, or part of it, and the cold air came through from outside. Then nothing. 40 seconds of nothing. He counted to 60 before he moved, repositioning to get a better angle on the building across the street without exposing himself to the window. From what he could see, the shot had come from the 7th or 8th floor of the parking structure directly north, a position that would have had a direct sightline to Sophia's desk, where she usually sat when she arrived in the morning. He had moved her into the building 4 minutes earlier than her usual arrival time. 4 minutes. The phone was already on the floor. Sophia had set it down after reaching the dispatcher. She was against the interior wall, her chair parked in the corner behind the standing cabinet, and she was looking at him with an expression that had moved past fear into something quieter and more specific. "Are you hit?" she said. "No. You?" "No." She looked at the ruined monitor, the glass on the floor, the open wound in the window where the third shot had gone through. "They had a sniper." "Yes." "They escalated." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Somewhere below them, the building was already reacting. He could hear alarms starting, voices in the hallway, the percussion of an ordinary morning being shattered. Through the walls, he could hear someone running. "Walker!" Her voice was very controlled. How close was that? He thought about lying. He thought about it for exactly 1 second. If you'd arrived on your usual schedule, you'd have been at your desk. He looked at the chair she normally parked at 45 degrees to the desk. The first shot would have hit you. She closed her eyes, opened them. "But I was 4 minutes early." "You were 4 minutes early." She looked at the chair and then at the window and then at her hands, which were not shaking, and he understood that she was holding them still by an act of will, and that the will was something she had been building for 18 months of this, and it was real, and it was strong, but it was not unlimited. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He didn't tell her it was going to be fine. He waited. "What happens now?" she said. "Police will be here in a few minutes. After that, the board is going to hear about this. Investors. This goes public within hours." He crouched to her level. "You need to decide right now how you want to handle what comes next, because it's going to come fast." She looked at him steadily. "I handle it the same way I've handled everything else. I stay visible, I stay in charge, and I don't let them have the narrative." He nodded. "Then we need to talk to Claire before the police get here, because there are documents in her possession that cannot be in that office when law enforcement starts going through things." "Why?" "Because if Damien knows we have evidence, he'll move faster than we can. Right now, his advantage is that he thinks we don't know. The moment that changes, everything accelerates and we lose control of the timeline." She understood this immediately. He could see her processing it, setting aside the adrenaline and the shock and the particular horror of having bullets come through your windows, and thinking practically. "Get Claire," she said. Well, the police were thorough and the chaos was total. By noon, the 42nd floor had been sealed, evacuated, and filled with investigators. News vans were parked on the street below by 11:15. By 1 o'clock, Bennett Technologies' stock had dropped 6%, and by 2, it was down 11. Ethan sat in a conference room on the 38th floor, being interviewed by a detective named Ramos, who was competent and skeptical in equal measure, and who asked every question twice from different angles, which Ethan respected professionally, even while it was inconvenient. You positioned yourself between the victim and the shooter before the second shot, Ramos said. Most people would have taken cover. I'm not most people. Clearly, Ramos looked at his notes. You had advance warning. I heard the first shot and I moved. No hesitation. I've been in rooms where people were shooting before. The hesitation gets trained out of you. Ramos looked at him over the notepad. Former military. Navy. Okay? He wrote something. In your professional assessment, this was a planned hit, not opportunistic? Somebody with a long rifle in a parking structure across the street waited for a specific window of time when the target would be at her desk. That's not opportunistic. And you've been on this assignment how long? 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, have you identified any threats? Anyone who might have wanted Ms. Bennett harmed? Ethan looked at the detective and made a decision. There are things I've been documenting that may be relevant to your investigation. I want to coordinate with you on the right way to share them. Ramos's expression sharpened. What kind of things? A pattern of incidents going back 6 months that I believe were attempts on Ms. Bennett's life, and evidence suggesting the origin of those attempts may be internal to the company. The detective was quiet for a moment. Internal meaning an employee, meaning more than one person with access, resources, and a financial motive. Ramos put down his pen, which Ethan recognized as the gesture of someone who has just decided the conversation has become more important than the notes. Tell me what you have, Ramos said. Ethan told him, carefully, precisely, sharing what he could share without revealing the full extent of what Claire had given him. He gave the detective enough to begin an investigation. He did not give him everything, because everything included evidence that would expose Claire, and exposing Claire before they had the full picture would close doors they needed to keep open. When he came out of the conference room, the hallway was busy with people in suits who were not police, board members, Ethan realized, and their assistants, and the particular flavor of lawyer who shows up when a company is in crisis. He recognized 2 members of the board from their headshots on the company website. He didn't know most of the rest. He found Claire outside the women's restroom at the end of the hall, standing with her back to the wall and her arms folded, watching the organized chaos with an expression of someone who has seen things going badly and is watching them go worse. The board called an emergency session, she said quietly when he reached her. They want Sophia in that room. When? 4 o'clock. He checked his watch. 1 hour and 40 minutes. Damien. He's already been in 3 private conversations with board members. I've been watching him work the room for the past hour. Her voice was very flat. He's good at it. Ethan thought about what Damien Cross was probably saying in those conversations, about a CEO who kept having accidents, about the difficulty of managing a global company from a compromised security situation, about fiduciary responsibility to shareholders, about what it meant for the corporation's future. He thought about the 11% stock drop. Is Prescott here? He called in remotely. He's on the phone with board members individually. She paused. That's how Prescott works. He doesn't show up. He applies pressure from a distance and lets other people be visible. We need to get Sophia to that meeting with something to work with, something that keeps the board focused on what actually happened instead of what Damien is telling them happened. Claire reached into the inside pocket of her jacket and produced a folded document. Page 17 of the shareholder agreement, section 4, subsection C. She handed it to him. Read it. He unfolded it, found the section. Removal of a founding CEO requires a 2/3 supermajority of the board and cannot be initiated within 90 days of a documented external threat to the CEO's safety. He looked up. External. The sniper was external. If the board is classifying today's incident as an external threat, which the police are treating it as, then they cannot legally initiate removal proceedings for 90 days. Damien knows this provision. Of course he does, but knowing it and wanting the board to focus on it are different things. He'll try to get them into a discussion about voluntary transition of operational responsibility, which sounds different, which isn't covered by the same clause. She held his gaze. Sophia needs to control what question gets asked in that room. He folded the document and put it in his jacket with the envelope from the morning. Tell her about this? She already knows. She called me from the police interview. Claire almost smiled, which was the first time Ethan had seen anything close to it on her face. She asked me to find you and make sure you had the information. He looked down the hallway toward the conference rooms, where the suited figures were still moving in and out of doorways, where the board was assembling for a meeting that would determine whether the past 3 weeks had bought anything, where Damian Cross was somewhere saying things to people who trusted him. She's something, he said, mostly to himself. Yes, Claire said. She is, which is why this has to work. The board meeting was not a disaster, but it was close. Ethan wasn't in the room. Security contractors don't sit in on governance sessions. But Claire got him positioned outside the glass-walled conference room in a spot where he could see without being conspicuous, which was the most he could do. He watched Sophia handle it. The board was 11 people, and several of them were visibly shaken by the morning's events, which was understandable, and several of them were doing the calculation that people with fiduciary responsibilities do when something expensive and terrifying happens. The calculation of liability and optics and what the next press cycle looks like. That was also understandable. It didn't make it any less dangerous. Damian Cross sat at the opposite end of the table from Sophia. From the outside, Ethan watched his body language. Careful, concerned, the precise performance of a man who is managing a crisis on behalf of people he cares about. He spoke for about 4 minutes at one point, gesturing toward a document that Ethan couldn't read, and whatever he was saying, 2 of the board members were nodding. Then Sophia spoke. He couldn't hear it. He read what he could. Her posture, the stillness she deployed like a tool, the way she made eye contact with each board member individually before moving to the next. She held up a document at one point. The shareholder agreement, he recognized the cover page. And she spoke for what felt like a long time, and when she finished, the nodding had stopped, and the 2 members who had been nodding at Damian were looking at the document in front of them instead. Damian spoke again. Sophia responded. The exchange was brief, and whatever she said, one of the other board members, an older woman who'd been silent for most of the meeting, turned to Damian and asked what appeared to be a very direct question. Damian's answer took a while. That was usually a bad sign. Ethan watched through the glass for 2 hours. When the meeting ended and people filed out, Claire appeared at his elbow. They tabled the operational discussion pending the police investigation. No action on leadership. 90-day clock is running. Sophia's motion? She proposed it herself, cited the provision, and had 3 board members second it before Damian could redirect. She paused. She also requested that an independent audit of the security infrastructure be initiated immediately, with findings reported directly to the board and not filtered through any internal management channel. She's cutting Damian out of the security review. Without naming him, very cleanly. Claire looked almost impressed. She's good. The hallway was clearing out. Board members were leaving with their lawyers and assistants, conversations muted and faces closed. Damian Cross came out of the conference room talking on his phone, and Ethan watched him from across the hall with the particular stillness of someone storing information. Damian didn't look toward him. People who are doing things they shouldn't be doing rarely make eye contact with security personnel. It was a tell that Ethan had observed in various contexts over the years. Then Sophia came out. She looked tired in the particular way of someone who has been performing composure for 2 hours while running on adrenaline and very little sleep, and the effort had cost something. But she found Ethan across the room and something in her expression settled. She rolled toward him. The hallway was empty enough to talk. 90 days, she said. I heard. Good. It buys us time. It doesn't fix anything. She looked at him directly. Where are we? Close. Not close enough yet. How not close enough? Connective tissue between the financial structure and the operational side. Damian's people see whoever he used to make the car crash happen, whoever he's been using since. That connection exists somewhere, and when I find it, what we have becomes what we need. She was quiet for a moment. He sat in that room today and told the board that he was worried about my well-being, that the stress of the past 6 months had been enormous, and that he just wanted what was best for the company and for me personally. She looked at her hands briefly. He sold it. I know. He almost sold it to me. In that room, watching him do it, for about 30 seconds I thought, what if I'm wrong? What if this is all just, you're not wrong. I know I'm not wrong. But he's been doing this for 22 months, Walker. You get good at something you've been doing for 22 months. She looked up. I spent 9 years trusting that man. Ethan didn't have anything to offer against that. There was no good version of what she was holding. The particular weight of a long betrayal lands differently than a sudden one, because the long ones reach back and recolor everything, and that retroactive coloring is its own kind of violence. We're going to get there, he said. I know. She said it like someone who has decided to believe a thing because the alternative is not useful. I know we are. He walked her to the elevator. In the lobby, the news vans were still visible through the glass front of the building, cameras pointed at the entrance. She looked at them for a moment. Tomorrow morning, she said. Same time as usual. I'll be here. She went through the lobby toward the car that was waiting. He watched her go and watched the lobby guard who was watching her go, and watched the camera above the entrance that was angled 2 degrees off from optimal. He was still watching when his phone buzzed. A text from the number belonging to his former colleague, the financial forensics specialist he'd reached out to 2 days ago. Found something in the Veritan structure. You need to see this. Not on the phone. Ethan typed back, tomorrow morning, early. Then he looked at the lobby entrance where the news van cameras were still running, and at the building around him. The cameras with their subtle misalignments, the stairwell with its history of propped doors, the elevator bank that had held Sophia trapped and airless for 12 minutes. He thought about 22 months of planning. He thought about what it meant that they'd sent a sniper today, which was loud and public and risky in ways the previous attempts hadn't been. The kind of escalation that happens when someone is running out of patience or running out of time, or both. He thought about Damian Cross in that conference room, delivering a performance of concern so practiced and fluent that it had worked on people who had known him for years. And he thought, they don't know what we have, but they know we're still here, both of us. And that's the thing that's making them desperate. He pulled his jacket closed against the lobby's cold air and went to get his car. He had work to do, and tomorrow was coming fast, and the 90-day clock had started running. Marcus Webb called in sick the day after the sniper attack, which was the first time in 4 years he had called in sick, according to the attendance records Claire pulled without being asked. His deputy, a 29-year-old named Torres, who had been in the role for 8 months, and who Ethan had quietly assessed as competent and uninvolved, took over building security operations and spent most of the morning running interference between the police forensics team still working the 42nd floor and the building's ordinary functioning. Ethan noted Webb's absence. He noted everything. He added it to the corkboard in the windowless room, which had become dense enough with photos and documents and string that it looked like something from a crime drama, which was not lost on him. The meeting with his financial forensics contact happened at 6:30 in the morning at a diner 4 miles from the building, in a booth in the back where the nearest other customer was 8 tables away, and the coffee was bad enough that nobody lingered over it longer than necessary. His name was Dennis Carr, 54 years old, 20 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit before going private. He was the kind of man who looked unremarkable in every setting. Medium height, forgettable face, the sort of person who sits down in a room and immediately stops being visible. He was also the best at what he did that Ethan had ever encountered. Dennis had a laptop open and a legal pad next to it covered in his cramped handwriting when Ethan slid into the booth. Veritan is a 4th-level shell, Dennis said, without preamble. Delaware registration, nominee directors, registered agent that manages about 400 similar entities. On its own, unremarkable, but the money moving through it is interesting. How interesting? The convertible note into Bennett Technologies was funded by a transfer from a Cayman entity called Meridian Structured Capital. Meridian's beneficial ownership traces through 2 more layers to a private trust registered in Singapore. Dennis turned the laptop to show him. The trust's sole beneficiary is listed as a family holding company. The family holding company is controlled by one general partner. Ethan looked at the screen. Harold Prescott's name wasn't there. What was there was the name of Prescott's adult son, Daniel, who was listed as managing partner of a real estate and private equity holding company that Ethan had never heard of. Daniel Prescott controls the trust, Dennis said. Harold Prescott has no direct fingerprints on Veritan or Meridian, but Daniel Prescott received 2 wire transfers totaling $900,000 from a consulting firm called Eris Strategic Advisory in the 8 months before the Bennett Technologies note was funded. An Eris Strategic Advisory is registered to an address in Wilmington, Delaware, that also houses 37 other companies, but the registered agent has a single disclosed client contact for Eris. Dennis pointed to the legal pad. Damian Cross. Ethan sat back. Damian Cross funded the vehicle that funded Veriton. Dennis continued. He moved the money through enough layers that it would take a forensic accountant 2 weeks of subpoenas to unwind it in a formal investigation. I'm telling you it now because I'm very good, and I've been doing this since before the internet made it easier. He paused. He paid Harold Prescott's son to bring Prescott in as the investor. The whole thing was structured from the inside out. Damian built the trap and then invited the trap setter in. And Prescott got a favorable conversion structure that would make him very wealthy if the leadership change happened. Daniel Prescott gets paid either way. Dennis closed the laptop. This is the connective tissue you were looking for. Financial chain from Damian Cross to Harold Prescott to Veriton Capital Partners. Documented. Ethan looked at the legal pad. Will this hold in court? With subpoena power and the right forensic accountant, yes. The chain is documented. The transfers exist. The entities exist. The timing is not coincidental. He paused. What you don't have yet is the connection to the physical side, the sabotage, the hired personnel. This shows motive and financial conspiracy. It doesn't prove who cut the brake cable. I know. Ethan had been thinking about this since the night before. Greg Tully, your IT man. Tully has access to building systems and he's been in communication with Damian about the transition timeline. But Tully's not the kind of person who hires mercenaries. He's infrastructure. He handles the digital side, the camera adjustments, the elevator, the access logs. Someone else is handling the physical operations. Someone with connections to the kind of people who do that work. Prescott's background is private equity. He's done deals in rough jurisdictions. He has the contacts. Ethan thought about the sniper, about the professional precision of it. Yesterday wasn't someone's first time. Dennis nodded slowly. If Prescott connected the operational side through his own network, there will be financial traces. Different kind, harder to find, but there. He looked at Ethan directly. I'll need more time. How much more time? 3 days? Maybe 4. 3. Ethan pulled out a card and wrote a number on the back. That's a secure line. Anything you find, no email, just the phone. Dennis pocketed the card, looked at his terrible coffee, and pushed it away. Ethan, these people sent a sniper to a downtown office building in broad daylight. That's not a careful move. That's someone who's decided the timeline is more important than the exposure risk. I know. Which means they're going to move again before you have what you need. Probably. What are you going to do about that? Ethan left 2 20s on the table and stood. Make sure I'm in the right place when they do. He was back at the building by 8, and Sophia was already in her temporary office on the 38th floor. The 42nd was still sealed when he arrived. She had a coffee and a document and the look of someone who had slept badly and made peace with it. Marcus Webb called in sick, she said before he could speak. I saw. He's been in the building for 4 years and never taken a sick day. She set down the document. He's running. Possibly. Or he's been told to stay away while something is set up. Ethan sat across from her. Dennis found the financial chain. Damian funded the Prescott entry through shell companies. I can give you the full picture, but the short version is, this is documented, and it's damning. Sophia received this with the stillness she'd been using all week, but something underneath it shifted. Not relief exactly, more like the particular feeling of having suspected a thing for a long time and finally having it confirmed, which carries its own kind of weight. How long before you have the rest? 3 days, maybe less. And in 3 days, what changes? We go to Detective Ramos with everything. Financial chain, the emails, the incident pattern. Let the investigation run with full information instead of partial. He paused. But before that happens, Damian is going to know the board meeting didn't go the way it was supposed to. The sniper was their accelerant, the thing that was supposed to create enough chaos that the board acted immediately. It didn't work. They have 90 days and an independent security audit coming, and Damian is the one who will get locked out of that audit. So he's going to do something else. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. The shareholders' meeting is in 18 days. But he had forgotten about the shareholders' meeting. He looked at her. Annual meeting, she said. Prescott has been agitating for a special resolution on the agenda, a non-binding confidence vote on executive leadership. He didn't have the votes before this week. After yesterday's news coverage, she stopped. I don't know if I still have the votes. Can the meeting be postponed? Not without triggering its own set of problems. The charter requires annual meetings. If I postpone without cause, it looks like I'm avoiding a vote I know I'll lose. She looked at the window. 18 days, Walker. Then we have 18 days. She looked at him, and there was something in that look that he had been noticing more in the past week. A directness that wasn't quite professional, the specific way she looked at him when she was thinking something that wasn't about the immediate tactical problem. He had been choosing not to examine what that was. You could have quit, she said, after the sniper. Any reasonable contractor would have pulled out and nobody would have blamed them. I'm not a reasonable contractor. I'm being serious. So am I. He held her gaze. I told you why I took the job. That hasn't changed. She looked at him for another moment, then looked away. 18 days, she said again in a different tone. The closing of a subject and the opening of something practical. Tell me what you need. The situation with Greg Tully broke on the second day. Ethan had been building a parallel file on Tully quietly. His access logs, his badge records, his physical presence in the building relative to the timing of each incident. The pattern was clean enough that it was obvious once you knew what you were looking at. Tully had been in or near the relevant building systems within 24 hours of each major attempt. Not at the moment of execution, he was careful about that, but in the setup window. What broke it open was the cleaning crew records. The vendor who provided cleaning services to Bennett Technologies used a digital check-in system for their contract workers, a tablet at the service entrance where temporary employees scanned a QR code to log their hours. The system was managed by Building IT. Building IT was Tully's department. When Ethan requested the raw access logs for the service entrance tablet, going back to the night the brake cable had been compromised, he found something that shouldn't have been there, a 6-minute gap in the log timestamp sequence. Not a deletion exactly, but a freeze, as if the system had paused and then resumed, with whatever had occurred during those 6 minutes simply not captured. A freeze that required someone with administrative access to the tablet's logging software to execute. The only person in the building with that specific administrative access, per the IT permissions matrix Claire quietly obtained, was Greg Tully. Ethan brought this to Sophia in the temporary office at 4 in the afternoon. She read it again. He froze the log so whoever went in to tamper with the chair wouldn't appear in the record, she said. Yes. Can we prove it was Tully who froze it and not a system glitch? The freeze was initiated from a specific user session. That session's credentials belonged to Tully. He paused. He was logged into the system remotely at 11:47 that night. The freeze occurred at 11:52. Sophia set the paper down. How many more days does Dennis need? He called this morning. He found payment records from a Prescott-connected entity to a private security contractor out of Eastern Europe. The contractor has a documented history of providing operational support to private clients in disputed jurisdictions. He paused on the phrase, which was the industry's preferred euphemism for things like sabotage and hired violence. The contractor received 2 payments totaling $380,000. The first was 4 weeks before your car accident. The second was 12 days after you came back to work. The room was very quiet. They paid twice, Sophia said slowly. Once to do it, and once because the first time didn't finish it. That's my reading. She was looking at something on the desk that wasn't a document, just the surface of the desk, the grain of the wood, a place to rest her eyes while she processed. Ethan waited. I want to go to Ramos today, she said. Not in 3 days. Dennis is still, I know, but we have enough. The financial chain, the emails, Tully's log access, the contractor payments, that's not circumstantial anymore. She looked up. And if we wait 3 more days, something else happens. I can feel it. He thought about this. He thought about what Dennis had said in the diner. They're going to move again before you have what you need. Let me talk to Dennis, he said. If he can consolidate what he has today, we go to Ramos tonight. Do it. He was already dialing when he left the office. Hatsem. Dennis could consolidate. He did it in 4 hours, working from wherever he worked when he was moving fast, and he sent an encrypted file to the secure line that Ethan decrypted on a laptop he'd bought in cash 2 days ago, specifically for this purpose. The file was 43 pages. It was, as Dennis had promised, thorough. Ethan was on the phone with Detective Ramos at 8:15 that evening. Ramos was quiet for a long time after Ethan finished the summary. Then he said, "How long have you been sitting on this?" "I've been building it. There's a difference. Some of this evidence was obtained. Everything in the financial analysis was derived from public records and disclosed corporate filings through forensic methodology. The internal communications were provided by an employee with legitimate administrative access to those records. The physical documentation, the brake cable, the tape from the stairwell door, the elevator log, I've had in my possession and I'm prepared to turn over immediately." Another silence. "You should have come to me sooner." "I came to you when I had something that couldn't be made to disappear by a defense attorney in 20 minutes. I'm coming to you now because I believe another attempt is imminent, and I can't stop it with a corkboard and a flashlight." Ramos made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Where are you?" "Building security office at Bennett Technologies." "Don't go anywhere. I'm bringing 2 people from financial crimes." They arrived at 9:40. There were 3 of them. Ramos, a financial crimes specialist named Park, who looked at Dennis's 43 pages with the focused reverence of someone encountering serious craftsmanship, and a third detective whose role seemed to be writing things down and looking skeptical. The meeting lasted 2.5 hours. Ethan laid out the full picture, the financial chain from Damian Cross through the shell structure to Harold Prescott's investment vehicle, the emails documenting the transition timeline, Greg Tully's access log manipulation, the Eastern European contractor, and the 2 payments. He laid the physical evidence on the table, the brake cable in its evidence bag, the tape from the stairwell door, the photographs of the camera adjustments, the elevator log with its timestamp gaps. Park said very little during the presentation, but filled most of a legal pad with notes. Ramos said, toward the end, "You've been protecting the source of the internal communications." "I have." "I'm going to need that source." "I know. I'll make the introduction." He paused. "She'll cooperate fully. She's been sitting on this for 4 months, and it's been eating her alive." Ramos looked at the spread of documents on the table. "Cross and Prescott. We'll need warrants." "How fast?" "For a conspiracy to commit murder case with this level of documentation, judge I'm thinking of, we can have the financial warrants by morning and arrest warrants by end of day tomorrow." He paused. "Assuming the DA agrees, and with what's on this table, I can't imagine why they wouldn't." "There's one more thing," Ethan said. "The shareholders' meeting is in 17 days. If Damian Cross knows the investigation is moving, he'll run," the skeptical detective said. It was the first thing he'd said in an hour. "Or he'll accelerate. And the contractor who was paid $380,000 is still operational. The sniper from the parking structure hasn't been identified." Ramos looked at him steadily. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking for surveillance on Cross and Prescott starting tonight. And I'm asking that when the warrants come through, they come through fast enough that there isn't a window. I can't promise timing. I know. I'm asking anyway." The window was not fast enough. The warrants came through the following afternoon, which was efficient by any measure, and the arrest teams moved on Cross and Prescott simultaneously at 4 o'clock. Cross was at the office. Prescott was at his home. But at 3:47, someone tipped them off. Ethan found out later that it was Marcus Webb, still officially sick, having spent the previous 36 hours in a hotel 3 miles away, maintaining just enough communication with Damian Cross to be functional as a warning system. Webb had a contact inside the DA's office, an administrative employee with access to the warrant application queue, who had sent him a text message at 3:43. 4 minutes was enough. Cross wasn't at his office when the arrest team arrived. He was in the parking garage. Ethan got the call at 3:51 from Torres, the deputy security chief, who had seen Cross moving through the building with 2 men he didn't recognize, not employees, not visitors registered at the front desk, heading for the sub-level. He was already in the elevator. The parking garage at sub-level 2 was mostly empty at that hour. The afternoon departure wave not yet started, and the fluorescent lighting had the specific quality of institutional spaces, functional and cold, and producing shadows that went straight down. Ethan came through the stairwell door, the one that had been propped with tape, the one he documented and photographed. And he saw them at the far end of the structure near the vehicle ramp that connected to the service exit. 4 men. Cross and 3 others who were not Cross's assistants or lawyers or anyone connected to Bennett Technologies' legitimate operations. The way they were standing and the way their clothes fit told Ethan everything he needed to know about what the next 30 seconds were going to involve. Cross saw him at the same moment. For a second, nobody moved. Then Cross said something to the man nearest him, and the man reached under his jacket. Ethan moved left, toward the nearest concrete column, and the shot went past him and hit the wall behind where he'd been standing with a sound like a hammer on stone. The echo in the enclosed garage was enormous. It bounced around the concrete pillars and the ceiling and came back from 3 directions at once, which was disorienting if you weren't expecting it, and which Ethan absolutely was expecting. He used the echo. While the sound was still reverberating, he moved again, right this time toward the next column, using the cover and the confusion, and he closed the distance on the nearest man by 20 feet before the man had reoriented to where Ethan actually was. He'd done this in worse places. Tighter spaces, lower light, more people. His body knew things that took too long to explain in language. The angle of approach that minimized his exposure, the specific positioning that let him control an arm without standing in front of the person it was attached to. He disarmed the first man in under 4 seconds, and it was not clean or elegant. He hit his shoulder on the side mirror of a parked car and felt something pull in his left side that was going to hurt considerably more in an hour. But the man was on the ground and the gun was not in his hand anymore. The second man was faster. He'd had time to find his angle, and he took a shot that Ethan heard as a pressure and a sound simultaneously, and something hit him in the right side below the ribs, and he knew what that meant, and he also knew that he wasn't done yet, so he filed it for later and kept moving. The third man was backing toward the ramp, covering Cross, and Ethan went right instead of straight at him, a diagonal that forced the man to move his aim across his own body, which slowed him down enough. And then there was a moment of close contact that Ethan won because he had been trained by people who spent years thinking about nothing else, and the man went down hard on the concrete. The garage was suddenly very quiet. Cross was at the base of the vehicle ramp, alone, looking at the 3 men on the ground and at Ethan, who was standing between him and the exit with blood soaking through his shirt on the right side and his left shoulder doing something uncomfortable. "Walker, don't," Ethan said. His voice came out level, which surprised him slightly. "Don't talk. Don't move." "You're shot." "I know. I've been shot before." He kept his eyes on Cross. "There are police in this building right now. Arrest warrants for you and Harold Prescott. Financial fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and the original charge that started all of this on the Riverside Expressway 18 months ago." He paused to breathe, which was becoming more effortful. "You're done, Cross. Everything you built is documented. Every transfer, every shell company, every communication with Prescott, every instruction you gave Tully." Cross looked at him with an expression that moved through several things: calculation, fear, something that might have been a different kind of calculation. And then he sat down on the concrete. Not collapsed, just sat, like a man who has finished doing something and is ready to stop. "I built that company," Cross said. 9 years. I built as much of it as she did. I know. She got the credit, she got the title, the profile pieces, He stopped. "You don't understand what it's like to build something and watch someone else put their name on it." Ethan said nothing. He was working on keeping his breathing even and his legs under him, and using his available attention for that rather than for a conversation that wasn't going to go anywhere useful. The stairwell door behind him burst open and there were voices. Police, Torres, and then someone else who was neither, who came through the door fast and then stopped when she saw the scene. Sophia. She took in the 3 men on the concrete, Cross sitting at the base of the ramp, and Ethan, who was holding himself upright with the particular deliberate effort of someone who has decided they are not going to fall down in front of people. You're shot, she said. People keep telling me that. Walker, I'm fine. I need you to be far away from Cross right now and let the officers... The officers are right behind me. She rolled toward him, and her voice was doing something complicated that she was trying to control and not quite managing. You're fine. You're not fine. You have blood on... Sophia. He looked at her. I'm okay. I promise. She stopped 2 feet from him and looked at him with an expression that had several layers in it and that she made no attempt to manage, and he thought, that's new. She's not managing it. Okay, she said. Her voice was very quiet. Okay? The officers moved past them to cross, and 2 more came through and secured the men on the ground, and the garage filled with radio noise and voices, and the particular organized chaos of law enforcement doing what it does. Ethan leaned against the nearest concrete column and let it take some of his weight. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. He sat down before they got there, not because he chose to, but because his legs made the decision without consulting him, and the concrete was cold through his jacket. Sophia was beside him. She had moved her chair next to where he'd sat down without him noticing her do it, and her hand was on his arm, not gripping, just there. Don't try to talk, she said. I wasn't going to. You were absolutely going to. He almost smiled. She almost did, and the almost was different from the almost in her office on his first week. Less controlled, more exposed. Something that had been held at a certain distance had closed. The paramedics came and he let them work, and he kept his eyes open and his breathing as regular as he could manage. And the evidence, the 43 pages, the emails, the brake cable, the timestamp gaps, all of it, was already with the people who would use it, and the arrest warrants were being executed, and the thing that had been running for 22 months in the architecture of a company and a careful betrayal was coming apart in a parking garage under fluorescent lights. He thought about Maya, who would be at school right now, drawing something or reading something or arguing about something with the focused energy she brought to everything. He thought about the conversation he was going to have with her about the day, and how to explain it in terms a 6-year-old could hold. He thought, I'll figure it out when I get home. The paramedics loaded him onto the gurney, and the last thing he saw before they moved him toward the ambulance was Sophia, who was following alongside, her chair keeping pace with the gurney's wheels on the concrete, her hand still on his arm, and her face set with an expression that was not quite professional and not quite personal, and was precisely in the space between those two things where he was beginning to understand the most important things tended to live. The bullet had cracked 2 ribs and passed through the intercostal muscle without hitting anything that would have made the situation significantly worse, which the surgeon described as fortunate and which Ethan received as the kind of information you absorb without fully feeling because the feeling comes later, when the adrenaline is done with you. He spent 4 days in the hospital. The first day was mostly unconscious. The second day he was conscious enough to be annoyed about it, which the nurses told him was a good sign. The third day he asked for his phone and was told it was in a bag with his personal effects, and that he could have it when he was moved out of the monitored unit, and he spent several hours staring at the ceiling thinking about everything that was happening in the world outside the room that he wasn't able to affect from a hospital bed. Sophia came on the second day. He was drifting in and out when she arrived, and he heard her before he saw her. The specific sound of her chair on the hospital floor, which he had learned well enough over the past weeks to recognize without looking. She came in and parked next to the bed and didn't say anything for a moment, and he turned his head and looked at her. She looked like she hadn't slept since the parking garage. You should go home, he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. You should not have taken a bullet, she said. We're both dealing with disappointments. He almost laughed, which hurt, and she watched him wince with an expression that was trying to be composed and wasn't quite making it. Cross and Prescott, he said, both in custody. No bail. The judge agreed the flight risk was significant given the offshore assets. She folded her hands in her lap. Greg Tully turned state's evidence the same evening you were in surgery. Apparently he'd been looking for a way out for months, and the moment he saw the arrest warrant, he practically ran to the DA's office. Smart. He's going to prison regardless, just for less time than the others. She paused. Marcus Webb was arrested at the hotel where he'd been hiding. He cooperated too, which is how we found out about his contact in the DA's office who tipped off Cross. The 4-minute window. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. If it had been 5 minutes, Cross would have been in a car and gone. If it had been 3, the officers would have reached him before he got to the garage. She looked at Ethan directly. If you hadn't been where you were, I was doing my job. You were shot. Occupational hazard. Walker. Her voice changed on his name, dropped the control it usually carried, became something more direct and less managed. Stop doing that. He looked at her. Stop making it smaller than it is, she said. You went into that garage alone, with 3 armed men, Mom, because you got a phone call and you went, and you... She stopped, pressed her lips together briefly. You could have waited for the police. You had enough time to wait for the police. Probably. Then why didn't you? He thought about how to answer that honestly. Because Cross had 4 minutes, and I didn't know how he was going to use them. And you were in the building, and... He stopped. I didn't want to find out what 4 minutes looked like if I wasn't between you and whatever he decided to do with them. She held his gaze for a long time. The hospital room was quiet in the particular way of places where people go to recover. Not peaceful exactly, but suspended, held at a remove from the ordinary velocity of things. Thank you, she said. It came out simply, without the professional framing she usually put around things, and the simplicity of it landed differently than elaborate gratitude would have. You're welcome, he said them. Welcome, he said, and meant it the same way. She stayed for 2 hours that second day. They didn't talk the whole time. There were stretches where she was on her phone managing whatever was happening at the company, and stretches where she was just there, in the room, present in the way that people are present when they've decided somewhere underneath the conscious decision-making that this is where they should be. Ethan drifted in and out, and each time he surfaced, she was still there, and he found that he didn't mind. That was new information about himself, which he noted and set aside. She came every day after that, not always for long. The company was in the middle of something seismic. Investigations, press, the board managing an enormous public relations situation, investors needing reassurance, the logistical reality of 2 senior executives being arrested and removed from their positions simultaneously. Sophia was running all of it from her phone and a laptop and a series of calls that she sometimes conducted in the hospital corridor outside his room, her voice coming through the wall in fragments, measured, authoritative, the particular register she used when she was managing people who needed to believe she was completely in control. He listened to those fragments sometimes and thought about the woman he'd met in the corner office 5 weeks ago, who had looked at him with the wariness of someone who has been disappointed enough times to make disappointment her baseline. She wasn't exactly different now, but something had shifted in the architecture of how she carried herself, a quality of being less braced for the next blow, and he thought it had less to do with the arrest than with something quieter and harder to name. On the 3rd afternoon, Maya came. Janet brought her after school, the 2 of them appearing in the doorway with Maya in front, holding a drawing she had made, a crayon figure in a hospital bed, identifiably meant to be Ethan based on the very serious expression and the dark hair, surrounded by what appeared to be either flowers or explosions, which with Maya was sometimes the same thing. I made you this, she said, crossing the room and handing it to him with the directness of a child who has decided that adult social rituals around gift-giving are inefficient. The red ones are flowers. I know they look like fire. They look great, he said. They look like fire, she said again, which was acknowledgement without apology, and she climbed onto the edge of the visitor chair and looked at him with the assessing focus she'd gotten from him. Does it hurt? A little. More than a little. Yeah, he said, more than a little. She seemed to appreciate the honesty. She looked around the room, and then her eyes settled on Sophia, who had been in the corner with her laptop and had closed it when they came in. You're the lady from the company, Maya said. I am. Sophia's voice was different with Maya, not softer exactly, but less managed, more direct in a different way. My name is Sophia. My dad talks about you. Does he? Not like a lot, but sometimes. Maya considered her with 6-year-old candor. He said you're really brave. Ethan looked at his daughter. He did not remember saying this, though he acknowledged it was possible. Sophia looked at him briefly, and there was something in that look that he had no immediate category for. Your dad is braver, she said to Maya. Maya thought about this seriously. You can both be brave, she said, with the pragmatic generosity of a child who sees no reason why bravery should be competitive. Then she went back to looking around the hospital room, appetite for that exchange apparently satisfied, and asked Janet if the cafeteria had chocolate pudding. After they left, Janet shepherding Maya with the practiced efficiency of someone who has been managing a 6-year-old's attention span for months, the room was quiet again. Sophia was looking at the drawing Maya had left on the bedside table. The crayon figures, the ambiguous red shapes. She's wonderful, Sophia said. She is. He paused. She's also right that you're brave, in case that landed weird coming from a 6-year-old. It didn't land weird. She looked at the drawing for another moment. It landed true, which is rarer. He was discharged on the 5th day, a day earlier than the original estimate because he had been difficult enough about the confinement that the attending physician apparently decided the cost-benefit analysis favored sending him home. Janet picked him up. Maya was at school. He sat in his kitchen that afternoon with tea he didn't particularly want and thought about the past 5 weeks in the particular way you think about something intense when the intensity has resolved and you're left with the ordinary shape of your life around the space it occupied. The case was proceeding. Damian Cross had lawyers who were doing what expensive lawyers do, which was slow things down and file motions and create the impression of complexity around a set of facts that were not actually that complex. Harold Prescott's legal team was more aggressive. Prescott had more money and more to lose and had apparently decided that the best strategy was to attack the financial forensics methodology, which Dennis Carr found professionally offensive and personally motivating. Greg Tully's cooperation was proving valuable in ways that were making both defense teams increasingly uncomfortable. Detective Ramos called that afternoon, and they talked for 20 minutes about the status of the investigation and what Ethan's testimony would look like when it came time. And Ramos said, toward the end of the call, "You know, most of the guys who do what you do would have had a very different response to that parking garage situation. Most of them weren't there. I mean, they would have waited." "I know what you mean." A pause. "The DA wants to make sure you're solid as a witness. Clean hands, clean process. Everything I did is documentable. The evidence was obtained through legal means or provided voluntarily. The individuals in the parking garage were actively threatening." He paused. "I'm solid." "Good." Another pause. "How's the side?" "Sore?" "Imagine so." Ramos hung up. Ethan sat in the kitchen for a while after that, watching the afternoon light move across the table, and thought about what comes after the thing that has been structuring your days is over. It was a feeling he recognized from other endings, from leaving the Navy, from the months after his wife died when the emergency of grief eventually gave way to the ordinary ongoing fact of her absence. The thing that has been requiring everything from you releases its claim and you're left with yourself, which is sometimes a relief and sometimes something harder. His phone buzzed. "Sophia, the board met this morning. Full statement of confidence. Independent audit confirmed no further internal security issues. We're okay." He typed back, "Good." A minute passed. Then, "The shareholders' meeting is in 12 days. I want you there." He looked at the message for a moment. In what capacity? In the capacity of someone who should be in the room. He set the phone down and looked at the afternoon light and thought about that. Eek. The weeks between the hospital and the shareholders' meeting had a particular texture to them. Not quiet exactly, because nothing about a corporate conspiracy prosecution is quiet, but slower than the preceding weeks had been. The pace of emergency had given way to the pace of process, which was less exhausting and in some ways harder to inhabit. Ethan came back to Bennett Technologies in a limited capacity, consulting on the security audit, meeting with the new head of building security that Sophia brought in from outside, working with Torres on the camera realignments and access protocol revisions that should have been in place for years. He moved through the building differently than he had in those first weeks, with less of the constant watchfulness, though the watchfulness didn't entirely leave. It just settled to a lower register, background rather than foreground. He and Sophia had coffee in her office most mornings. Sometimes they talked about the case or the company. Sometimes they talked about other things. She asked about Maya's school, about the book Maya was reading, about the question Maya had apparently posed to Janet about whether fish could be sad, which had become a recurring subject of serious household debate. Sophia listened to these things with genuine attention, not the performed attention of someone being polite, and she offered opinions about fish sentience that were more considered than the topic strictly required. And Ethan found that he looked forward to these mornings in a way that had nothing to do with professional obligation. She told him things too, during those mornings, not all at once and not as confession. More the way people share things when they've decided the other person can hold the weight of it. She talked about the accident, which she had never talked about in any real detail. The 2 seconds before impact when she'd understood what was happening and the absence of time to do anything about it, and waking up 11 days later to a body that had rearranged its relationship with her without asking. She talked about the particular grief of that, which was not like the grief of losing a person but had its own logic and its own stages, and about the moment in rehabilitation when she had understood that some of what she'd lost was permanent and had to be grieved before she could figure out who she was going to be with what remained. I spent a lot of the early months being angry at the wrong things, she said one morning. The chair, the accessibility failures in buildings that should have known better, the way people's voices changed when they talked to me. That particular tone, like I'd become slightly less real. She held her coffee cup in both hands. I was angry at the symptoms instead of the disease. The disease being fear. I was afraid that without the physical version of myself that people had responded to, the woman who walked into rooms a certain way, who held herself a certain way, I was going to have to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. She paused. And I was right, by the way. I did have to work harder. That part wasn't just fear. But you did it. I did it badly and with a lot of bad days in between. She looked at him. That's the version nobody sees. The board sees the composed CEO who handled a conspiracy and a sniper attack and came out with her company intact. They don't see the Tuesday night 3 months after the accident when I sat in my apartment and genuinely didn't know if I could go back. What made you go back? She thought about it. Anger, mostly. Not the healthy kind, the stubborn, unreasonable kind. The kind that says, I am not going to let this be the ending. She looked at her coffee. It's not a very inspiring answer. It's an honest one. Your version is more inspiring. Former Navy SEAL, single father, steps in front of bullets. My version involves a lot of eating cereal for dinner and losing arguments about bedtime with a first grader. She laughed. It was a real one, unmanaged, and it changed her face in a way that he had come to look for in those mornings without entirely meaning to. He told her things too, in that same gradual way. About the deployment where he'd lost a man he was responsible for. A 24-year-old named Reyes who had been in the wrong position at the wrong moment and whose death Ethan had carried as a specific weight for years, not because it was his fault in any way that held up to rational examination, but because rational examination doesn't have much jurisdiction over grief. About coming home to his daughter the night after Reyes died, the particular agony of ordinary life continuing, Maya needing breakfast and clean clothes and someone to read to her, the world demanding its normal requirements while he was carrying something that made normal feel like a foreign language. About his wife, which he rarely talked about with anyone. Her name had been Rachel. She'd been a teacher, 3rd grade, and she'd had the quality that good teachers have of paying complete attention to whoever was in front of her at a given moment, which had made Ethan feel, when they were first together, like the most visible he'd ever been. She died of an aggressive cancer when Maya was 2 years old, 4 months after Ethan's second deployment ended, and the timing of those losses, the deployment, the homecoming, the diagnosis, the death, had compressed into a period of about 18 months that he still couldn't look at directly, only at an angle. Does Maya remember her? Sophia asked. Not really. She has the pictures. She asks questions sometimes. He paused. She asked me last year if she was going to have a mom someday. I didn't know what to say. What did you say? I said I didn't know. That someday was a long time and I couldn't see it yet. He looked at the city through the window. She said that was okay. That she could wait. Sophia was quiet for a moment. She sounds like you. She's better than me. That's what good parents think, she said. That their kid got the best parts and bypassed the rest. Maybe. She got your watchfulness. I noticed it when she was here. The way she looked at the door. He had noticed that she'd noticed. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that one. Nothing to do. It's not a flaw. She looked at him steadily. It's just a person who learned that the world requires attention. That's not the worst thing to know. He thought about that for the rest of the day. The shareholders' meeting was held in the company's main conference facility on the ground floor, a room that held 400 people and that was full, which Ethan noted with the part of his brain that never stopped assessing rooms. He stood at the back, which he preferred. Better sight lines, faster access to the exits, less likelihood of being in anyone's way. Sophia opened the meeting at 9 o'clock. She had prepared remarks, and she delivered them with the precision and warmth that Ethan had watched her develop over their morning conversations into a kind of mastery. She knew how to be in a room, how to hold an audience's attention, not through performance, but through the quality of her presence, the sense she gave of taking every person in the room seriously. She talked about the company's performance, strong numbers despite the disruption of the past months, a product roadmap that was generating genuine industry interest, the new executive team she'd assembled to replace the positions vacated by Cross, and the subsequent review. She talked about the security overhaul and the lessons the company had taken from it, and then she stopped with the prepared remarks and said something she hadn't written down. I want to acknowledge something directly, she said. Several of you have asked, through various channels, whether the events of the past 2 months raise questions about the company's leadership, whether a CEO who spent 11 days in intensive care and uses a wheelchair as a result of an attempt on her life, is the right person to lead this corporation forward. She paused. I want to be clear that I understand why those questions get asked, and I want to be equally clear that my answer is yes. I am the right person, not because of what I survived, but because of what I know about this company, what I've built here, and what I intend to build next. The room was very quiet. What I will not do, she continued, is pretend that the past 18 months have been easy, or that I handled everything well, or that I didn't have moments of serious doubt about whether I could keep going. I did. I had all of those things, and I came back anyway, because the people in this building deserve leadership that tells them the truth about difficulty, instead of performing the absence of it. She paused, and in the pause, Ethan thought about what she had told him about the Tuesday night, 3 months after the accident, in her apartment. The version nobody sees. The conspiracy that was brought against this company was sophisticated, patient, and built on a foundation of misplaced trust, she said. It was also ultimately unsuccessful, not because of perfect systems or perfect security. We had neither. It was unsuccessful because one person refused to walk away when everything suggested he should. She looked toward the back of the room. 380 people followed her gaze. Ethan did not enjoy this. He stood at the back with his hands loose at his sides and looked back at the room and thought about being invisible, which was what he was good at and what he had no ability to do with 400 people looking at him. Ethan Walker accepted this assignment when 13 other professionals had already refused it, Sophia said. He protected this company not by being the biggest or loudest presence in the room, but by doing the harder thing, by paying attention, by refusing to accept the comfortable explanation when the uncomfortable one was closer to the truth. And when it came to the moment of consequence, he put his body between me and the people who wanted me dead. Her voice was steady and direct and entirely unperformed. I owe him more than I can say in this room. The company owes him the same. The applause started somewhere in the middle and spread. Ethan looked at his shoes briefly, which was the only retreat available to him. Afterward, in the corridor outside the conference facility, she found him. The crowd was still moving through the space, shareholders, executives, press waiting for the post-meeting statement. You didn't tell me you were going to do that, he said. You would have talked me out of it. Maybe. Definitely. She looked at him with the direct, unmanaged expression that he had come to understand was her actual face, not the CEO composure, not the controlled presentation, but the person underneath who had been Tuesday night in the apartment, afraid and came back anyway. I offered you the chief security officer position, she said. You said no. I said no because I'm not an executive. That's not what I do. I know. I knew you'd say no. She paused. So I have a different question. He waited. I'm not going to make it romantic, she said, because I'm still figuring out what this is, and I don't want to put a wrong word on it and have that be the word that sticks. She looked at him steadily. But I know that the mornings are better when you're in them. And I know that Maya said she could wait for something she doesn't have a name for yet, and I know that I'm not asking you to have an answer right now. She paused. I'm asking you to not decide against it before you've had time to see what it could be. Ethan looked at her. He thought about Rachel, the way you think about someone you've loved and lost, not with the sharp pain of early grief, but with the gentler awareness of an absence that has become part of your shape. He thought about what it meant to be ready, and whether ready was a state you arrived at or a state you decided to inhabit. He thought about Maya, who had looked at Sophia and said, You can both be brave with the pragmatic certainty of a child who has not yet learned to make simple things complicated. I'm not deciding against it, he said. She held his gaze. Something settled in her expression. Not the resolution of anything, but the beginning of something, which is a different and quieter thing. Good, she said. 3 months later, Damian Cross accepted a plea agreement that carried a 22-year sentence. Harold Prescott fought his charges to trial and lost, and the jury deliberated for less than a day. Greg Tully received 7 years with the possibility of parole. Marcus Webb, whose cooperation had been extensive if belated, received 3 years and was already negotiating a reduced sentence. The Eastern European Contractors Organization was referred to international law enforcement, which was the kind of outcome that moved slowly and with significant uncertainty, but moved. Bennett Technologies posted its strongest quarter in 3 years. The new security infrastructure, overseen by the outside firm Sophia had brought in, was the kind of thing that made Ethan feel better about the building, which was a low bar, but a real one. Claire Morgan was promoted to Chief of Staff, a title that finally matched the job she'd been doing for years, and she received it with the understated efficiency of someone who has been waiting for the world to catch up with the obvious. On the day the trial verdict came in, Ethan was at Maya's school for her end-of-year performance, a 45-minute production involving 30 first-graders interpreting the life cycle of a butterfly through song and movement, which was exactly as chaotic as it sounds, and which he wouldn't have missed for anything. Maya spotted him in the third row and waved with her whole arm, abandoning the choreography briefly and then rejoining it with the breezy confidence of someone who has decided that rules are generally good, but personal exceptions are reasonable. He got the news about the verdict during the intermission, a text from Ramos. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing in 6 weeks. He sat with that for a moment, in a school auditorium that smelled like construction paper and sneakers, surrounded by other parents taking photos and managing small children, and he thought about a parking garage and a bullet and a woman who had asked him to stay. He texted Sophia, "Verdict's in, guilty." The response came fast. "I know." Ramos called. A pause, then, "Are you okay?" He thought about the question, about what okay meant and what it didn't mean, and how much space there was between those two things. "Yeah," he typed. "I'm at Maya's school. She just abandoned the butterfly choreography to wave at me. She's perfect. Don't tell her that. She already knows." A longer pause, then, "Dinner tonight? I'll cook. Warning, I'm not good at it." He looked at the stage where the curtain was coming up again, and 36-year-olds were reassembling themselves into positions that approximated the second act. "I'll bring dessert," he typed. "I'm not good at that either." "Perfect," she sent back. "We'll manage." He put his phone in his pocket and looked at the stage where Maya had found her position again and was watching the wings for the cue to start moving, her face set with the particular focused attention she brought to things she'd decided were worth taking seriously. His face, he knew, the face that drove people crazy and kept them safe. The music started. Maya moved. She was not the most technically precise child on that stage, but she was completely present in it, which mattered more than precision, which is maybe the thing worth knowing about most endeavors. He sat in the third row and watched his daughter be a butterfly. And outside the building, the city went on doing what cities do. And somewhere across town, a woman who had survived what she'd survived was figuring out what to cook for dinner and deciding that imperfect would be enough, which it would. There is a version of this story where the lesson is about heroism, about the right person showing up at the right moment. That version is not wrong, but it's incomplete. What it leaves out is the ordinary weight of it. The cereal for dinner nights and the hospital ceilings and the Tuesday nights in apartments when nobody knows if they can go back. The things that don't look like strength from the outside and are the whole of it from the inside. What Ethan Walker had learned in the years before this and the weeks inside it was that staying is not a single act. It's the accumulation of smaller decisions made in the moments when leaving would be easier. Decisions made not because you're certain, but because certainty is a luxury that rarely shows up when you need it, and you move without it, or you don't move at all. What Sophia Bennett had learned was not so different, that the thing you're afraid makes you lesser. The chair, the vulnerability, the Tuesday nights is not the obstacle to what you can become. It's part of it. You don't arrive at strength by removing the weight. You arrive by carrying it long enough that carrying becomes natural, and what felt like limitation becomes the specific shape of your particular life. Neither of them had it figured out. That was the point. The butterfly performance ended. Maya took a bow with 30 other 6-year-olds, grinning with a completeness that only children can produce, and found Ethan in the third row with her eyes. And the look on her face was the kind that costs nothing to give and means everything to receive. He drove her home afterward. She talked about the performance with the detailed enthusiasm of someone processing an important event, covering every moment of consequence, and he listened and responded and made the appropriate sounds of a parent paying attention, which he was. At a red light, she stopped talking for a moment and looked at him in the particular way she had, the watchful look, his look on her young face. "Is it over now?" she asked. "The bad stuff with your job?" "The worst of it, yeah." "Good." She looked back out the window. "I didn't like worrying." "I know, I'm sorry." "You don't have to be sorry. You were doing it right." She said it with the matter-of-fact authority of a first grader who has thought about this. "You just have to be done now." "I'm working on it." The light changed. He drove. That evening, he stood at Sophia's door with a box of bakery cookies that Maya had chosen with the seriousness the occasion deserved. She'd spent 4 minutes in front of the display case before settling on chocolate with sea salt, which she said were for serious situations, which he felt was accurate. And Sophia opened the door and looked at the box, and then at him and said, "Those look like professional-grade cookies." Maya picked them. She takes it seriously. "Smart kid." She stepped back from the door. "Dinner is approximately 45 minutes from being edible. I may have been optimistic about my abilities. I'll help." "You were shot in the ribs 3 months ago." "I can stir things." "Fair enough." She turned back toward the kitchen, and he followed her in, and the door closed behind them, and the city was outside doing its city things, ordinary and enormous and indifferent. And inside the apartment, 2 imperfect people stood in a kitchen trying to make something work, which is all any of it has ever been.